It's been a wonderful transmission with your host, Vinny the Wonderful.
What the dog doing? A question that has bedeviled artists for a very, very long time. I speak, of course, of El Perro, the dog, painted by Francisco de Goya. As I've said before, I could very possibly talk about Francisco de Goya in every episode, and today I am talking specifically about one of his paintings. Now, if you're not familiar with Francisco de Goya as of yet, odds are you probably know the painting Saturn Devouring His Own Son, which is another painting from the same series as The Dog. It is a series of paintings that are known as the Black Paintings. And the entirety of the collection of the Black Paintings are currently in the Museum of Prado in Spain. But they are a bit peculiar. And so before I go into talking about what the dog is doing, which is today's topic, I'd like to give a short introduction of what are the Black Paintings. You see, Francisco de Goya was a bit out of sorts when Napoleon invaded Spain, and so he decided very wisely to retire himself to a home, a villa as it were, that he had bought, that was called Quinta del Sordo, which is kind of ironic because he was going deaf. Quinta del Sordo means the deaf man's villa, you know. So he was losing his hearing sense. However, the house, it was named the deaf man's house, the deaf man's villa, because of the previous owner was deaf. And so in there, on the walls, on the gesso of the walls of that house, he painted, amongst many others, Saturn devouring his own son, and he painted the dog painting, and many others. I have here the list. You can see all of them in very high resolution on Wikipedia. I have El Perro and Saturno devorando a su hijo. All of them you can see. El Gran Cabrón, the Witch's Sabbath, which is a very interesting one. I'd like every single one of those paintings, they could inherit their own episodes. I actually thought about making a mini series where I talk about every single one of those paintings because they deserve their own episode. But I have uncovered something about the dog in doing my own research, which was interesting. But I digress. So in the deaf man's house, he had bought and he painted those 14 paintings, which are now called the Black Paintings. However, when he was alive, no one knew about them. He never told anyone about those paintings. He never wrote about them in letter. No one knew. It was only after his death, and I think after even his own son was dead, that a French-German banker bought the house, and when he saw the paintings, he paid an specialist to remove the paintings from the gesso of the wall into canvas, so that he could sell the paintings. He would keep the house and sell the paintings. And that professional that he hired to do that has been criticized in history as doing a hack job. And that is important to a story. I like to think that given the times and the fact that the guy had some money, that the professional did the best he could have done at that period in time. That would have been, let me see, 1878. And so he showed them in Paris, trying to sell them. No one was interested, which sounds absurd today. But after that, he just gave all the 14 paintings to the Museum of Prado, where they remain, and you can see even today. However, as another quick side note, in 2001-ish, around that time, the Museum of Prado paid a professor named Junqueira, to do some research on the paintings. You know, museums and galleries, they do that to try to improve the value of the painting. But what the Professor Junqueira found out was that it is very likely that those particular paintings were not painted by Goya. That's a little bit tricky to say. Nowadays, it is a bit of a touchy subject. I could research a little bit better. I have not read Professor Junqueira's book about this topic, but I've read the New York Times article back when he was still writing it. But anyway, regardless of who painted it, it's attributed to Goya, and let's go with it. So in my own very modest library of art books, I took all that I had on Goya and I was reading them, and it's interesting to see the difference between the modern biographies about Goya and the ones that were written in the past. The modern ones take more into account his letters, and you can see that he wasn't a lonesome misanthrope that hated society. He was just a guy that perhaps liked his own quiet time. That was most of the reason why he moved out. And that again in probably Napoleon as well. But anyway, in this one biography that I have, written by an Argentinian poet named Lázaro Liacho, that was published in the 50s, I think in 1950. Let me check the precise date. Yes, in 1956, he wrote this biography on Goya, and I was reading through it until he mentioned the black paintings, and they all had their names in Spanish, and the dog was called Perro luchando contra la corriente. And that threw me back because I knew that painting as The Dog. I did not know that there were alternate titles for those paintings. And then you realize, oh yeah, if Goya never talked about those paintings to anyone, we don't know how he called those paintings, which is very interesting. And so, no, the one that has the dog is just called The Dog because that's all there is to it. But then they have this name, Perro luchando contra la corriente, which translates to dog fighting against the current, against the tides. And so I went on researching that topic specifically, And I came across, this alternate title, the explanation as to why it's called like that. And as far as I know, apart from the French-German banker that bought the house, there was a poet that saw the paintings on the wall and a photographer. And so this French poet, writer, draftsman called Charles Iriarte, which is a kind of hard to pronounce name because the first name is French and the second one is Spanish. I hope I made it justice. But anyway, he described the painting as una cabeza de perro que parece luchar contra la corriente, the head of a dog that seems to be fighting against the tides. And so I found that an interesting reading of the painting. And then I found out that there was a photographer named Laurent that took a black and white photo of that painting. And I have the black and white photo, and I'll post in the description link. And in that black and white photo, the abstract mess of the background of the painting is a little bit more descriptive of what might be going on. Now, if you look at the description given by the Wikipedia page in English, you see that the dog is usually the name given, and another common titles are the dog, head of a dog, buried dog, half-drowned dog. Interestingly enough, the half-submerged dog. But most of those official sources and biographies, they most of the times say that the dog is just surrounded by abstract scenario and color, or because the front mass is brown, sometimes it's suggested that the dog is submerged in sand or dirt. And of course, this is not a super discovery of mine, but even in official sources, in all the biographies that I've read and many online, not too many of them make the case that the dog is actually swimming. There is the fact that the painting suffered a hack job when it was removed, so details that are important might have been lost. And when I talk about the other paintings, possibly in the future, if you guys are interested in this subject, you see that this hack job actually very clearly influenced severely other paintings. Then there is the poet that is the only person that saw it and left recorded description, said that the dog seems to be swimming against the tide. And there is the photo which seems to indicate that the colors, the mass of colors in front of the dog and the ones in the background aren't just random abstract colors. There is also the fact that when dogs swim, they do put their noses up in the air and they do that kind of pose. So I think that the answer to the riddle is, when you think of the question, what the dog is doing, the answer is the dog is swimming. And that has been our episode on the black painting, The Dog. As always, thank you so much for listening in. Please visit vinnythewonderful.blogspot.com or send an email at heyvinny@hotmail.com. That's HEYVINY@hotmail.com. And I hope you have an excellent day or night or morning or